Israel gave me everything. I'm the product of peace between Jews and Arabs, and how Jews and Arabs can live peacefully side by side together as brothers and sisters. My name is Sofia Salma Khalifa, and this is my story. I'm a Muslim Arab growing up in Israel. I'm a mother of two, and I have a master's from Stanford University. I was born to a Muslim family in Israel. My mom is a single mom. I have 8 siblings. My dad has 2 wives in parallel, and my mom decided she didn't want to live with his wife in the same house and didn't want to be in that village. And she went and moved to Nahariya. This is the Jewish town in northern Israel where she raised us, 9 children, on her own. We were supported by the welfare in Israel, by the welfare system, because otherwise my mom would not be able to provide. Israel is a very beautiful and strong multi-ethnic democracy. Around 20% of the population are Arab Muslims, like myself. We also have Christian Arabs, we have Druze. The Arab citizens of Israel receive equal rights. They get welfare, they get education, they get healthcare, they get all the rights, the protection, anything that a Jewish citizen would get. My Muslim teacher used to teach us everything about the Jews who stole the land. He would be teaching us that we would never be able to become anything in this country because this is the Jewish country, and the Jewish people would not allow you to become an engineer. They would not allow you to become doctor. You cannot be anything. And we will have to resist. We would have to fight. We would have to do everything that we can to get the land back. I remember leaving these classes feeling like I don't have a future. But that really contradicted my experience with the Jewish people that I met. Because they were loving, they were kind, I was their friend, I would go to their houses. They didn't mind that I was Arab, they didn't see me as an Arab. They see me just as their friend. So it didn't land very well with me. I was with my girlfriend, she was staring, and I was asking her, like, what are you thinking about? And she said, like, you know, I really wish one day to become a suicide bomber. I really wish to become a shaheed one day. That moment really broke me to pieces. On the school break between 8th grade and 9th grade in the summer, I was discovered by a fashion photographer. That sounds really exciting. I should try that. But I knew that this is a choice of no return. I cannot step my foot in the village if I'm a model. I traveled to Europe for work, and I spend a lot of my time in Tel Aviv. My uncle, my mother's brother, he threatened to cut off my head for dishonoring the family. And he obviously could not do that because we live in Israel, and Israel protects women. When he said that to my mom, she told him, "You won't even touch a hair on her head." I felt so empowered by her. And I wanted to send this message to all the Arab girls that you can be anything that you want. You can pursue any path that you want. It's very important to note that Israel pulled out of Gaza completely, unilaterally in 2005. They uprooted all the Jewish citizens who used to live in Gaza. All of them. All of them were taken out forcefully. After 2005, there was no Jew alive or dead in Gaza. They even take out the graves of the Jewish people because they didn't know what is going to happen to the graves. And this was a test case to see how a self-governing Gaza would look like. Gaza is a very fertile land. They had greenhouses that used to export flowers to all of Europe. And The hope in Israel was that we're hoping that Gaza can become the Singapore of the Middle East, this tiny country that has this very good economy with all the greenhouses, and they have the most beautiful beaches in the region, and they can go and fish, they can build, we're going to help them in tech. This is our path for peace. Days after the Jews, left Gaza, Hamas went and burned out all the greenhouses. They burned everything to the ground because this was the Jews' greenhouses before. If people care about Muslim lives or any Palestinian lives in Gaza, you first and foremost want to make sure that their leadership cares about them. And Hamas is a sovereign government of Gaza. It's a terror organization that hijacked the Palestinian people for their own religious cause of transforming the Middle East and the entire world into an Islamic state. Palestinians don't have the right to say the truth. They cannot openly speak about the atrocities that Hamas is doing to them. If they speak against it, they're dead. People keep saying, if you're calling Hamas a terror organization, this is Islamophobia. No, this is not Islamophobia, this is the fact. I love Muslim people, I'm a Muslim. My family is Muslim, and I'm still condemning what Hamas did. Why people cannot see the truth about this situation? A lot of these people come from a reality that they teach you from a very young age to hate the Jews.
When an Iranian ex-Hezbollah shows up in Israel, everyone wants to know why I'm here.
You were born in Iran.
Correct.
You were a Hezbollah fighter for 3 years.
Correct. I was on my way to United States to convert Christians into Islam. And I had 30 illegal passports at that time. I was arrested, put in jail in Malaysia. I was a dedicated Muslim. Not only prayed the prayers, but I read the Quran once every 10 days, cover to cover. So I was very dedicated. In my time in jail, one day as I'm praying, a man appears in front of me, normal size, but his being shines like light. And this light was not a normal light. This light carried identity in it. You knew that he is holy and he is just. And instantaneous, I knew I am not. Even though I had prayed so many prayers, even though I had fasted so much, and I had read the Quran, and I had volunteered to walk on landmines, or I had participated in hanging people trying to please Allah. I knew, even though I have kept all the rules and regulation of Islam, I knew I'm not just and I'm not holy. And I knew the only just thing for him to do is to kill me. But I didn't want to die, so I ran to the corner of the room, literally held my head in my arms and just cried out, shouting, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." And I didn't think he will forgive me because he is just, till I felt a touch on my left shoulder. And he said, "I forgive you." And I felt a weight just lifted off me. And I knew I'm forgiven, but I don't know how. And I was confused. I was like, okay, I don't understand. Only God can forgive. You just forgave me. You are God. But you are a different God than the one I have studied about. this is not Allah. So who are you that forgives me and I feel forgiven today? And he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I thought, that's very powerful. It means a lot, because as a Muslim, you pray, Ihdina sirata mustaqim, show me the straight path, kind of thing. And so the way is a direction, truth is something you measure, life is a source, but he claims to be all those three. I never thought the way is a person, the truth is a person, and life is a person, and all of them is the same person. So I said, I don't understand. What is your name? And he said, Jesus Christ. And someone grabbed all my bones out of my body. It just fell like a piece of meat to the ground, and I just began to weep.
What changed after that?
It's like, you know, being colorblind. And then suddenly you see colors again. And you realize the world is so much more beautiful than you ever thought. If you ask me what made the world so colorless, it's the hatred, the anger that is in the heart of every Muslim. I mean, people say, why did you hate the Jews? I had never met a Jew. But I thought Hitler was a good man for doing what he did. He just didn't finish the job. I don't know why I hated them. No Jew had ever done anything bad to me. God didn't design us to hate. Didn't design us to want to see someone dead. He did not design us for these things. These are design of Satan. How do you think killing the people that God gave them this land to is going to please Allah? The God of heaven, the God of Abraham and Moses, the God of their prophets, like Jesus, is not a God that celebrates when Jews are killed.
In early October, Afshin was visiting Israel with his ministry, which promotes friendship between Persians and Jews. But like millions of others, he found himself in the middle of a war when Hamas launched a bloody attack. When Afshin visited the CBN News Bureau, he met another guest, Sasha Ariev, whose teenage sister had been kidnapped by Hamas. He and his wife wept as they watched her story.
There is absolutely no justification, no explanation that can make any of these okay. Nobody should celebrate when one of the sons of Father Abraham is killing another. And I just want to say, I'm sorry that your family is going through this.
I'm sure that a lot of Muslims around the world, they do not want this to happen.
Off camera, Afshin and his wife prayed for Sasha and invited her to visit them for dinner. Her reply, I'd be happy to come and bring my sister with me.
We are standing with all the Jewish people, with the people of Israel, and we are mourning their sorrow of their family members that have been lost, but also for the right of Israel to exist.
At the end of our interview, Afshin offered a prayer for those on both sides of the war in Israel.
You love the world, the whole world, all the people of the world so much that you sacrificed Jesus Christ so that we will not perish but have eternal life. I pray today that the revelation of Jesus Christ would go forth amongst the Muslims and the sons of Ishmael. I pray that you would remember that covenant with Ishmael, that you would go forth, because Ishmael is thirsty for the revelation of love, for the revelation of Jesus Christ, for the revelation of salvation. Father, I pray that there would be a hand of protection that would protect Isaac on every front, not only in Israel, but all around the world. Give us visions, dreams, wisdom to speak peace in this war. In Jesus' mighty name, I pray. Amen.
May we all echo that prayer, and may we echo the prayer of Abraham over Ishmael. May Ishmael ever stand before you. May there be dreams, may there be visions, may there be an impartation of his love and forgiveness to a hurting Muslim world. If you're wondering what happened to him could happen to you, here's a wonderful promise. Jesus says, I will manifest myself. He showed up for him. And in that showing up, he showed that he's the Alpha, the Omega. That he dwells outside of time and space. He is the Eternal One. And he has the power to forgive sins. He forgave a member of Hezbollah, transformed him from hatred into love. And he can do that for you. You can have the prophecy of Moses fulfilled over you, that God has become our salvation. God has become your salvation. All you have to do is ask for it. It's a very simple prayer, but when you pray it with all of your heart, God promises that you'll find him. Here's the prayer. Jesus, if you're real, if you really are the Savior, if you can really save me, if you can really forgive me, could you show up? Could you show up for me? Because I need you now. If you pray that with all of your heart, he'll answer.
The Jews stole the lands to the Palestinians. The Jews are responsible for all the atrocities in the world, and we just need to destroy them. So some of the people are brainwashed, and they're sometimes blinded to their own anti-Semitism. They say, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Zionist. Now, what does that mean? It's like saying, I'm for women, but I don't think they should have rights. Because Zionism means that you believe in the Jewish people right to have a state where they're safe and free from persecution, right? So how can you stand for the Jews and not wanting them to be able to defend themselves? And the other side, I think it's like a herd of sheep who are just like following whatever sound good to them. And they think that Hamas is the weak part, Israel is strong, and thus we need to support the weak. The weak could be a terror organization. And they're not that weak after we saw what they were able to do on October 7th. The everyday American should care about this because the West is going to be next. Israel is just the first. Some of the countries, the Arab countries, or let's take for example Iran, calls Israel the small devil and America the big devil. Is this what we want to support in this country? I hear a lot of people calling Israel an apartheid state. Maybe let's start with explaining what is an apartheid. It's a discrimination based on race. Arabs in Israel, who constitute 20% of the Israeli population, they're equal citizens. They're getting all the rights from Israel. They have education, healthcare, welfare, full rights, full protection. They're equal citizens for everything. Where's the apartheid? I'm very proud in being Arab. I'm very proud about being Muslim. But all I needed as a child, as a human being, to realize my full potential was give me the security, the safety, the education. Give me the opportunity. Israel gave me everything. I'm the product of peace between Jews and Arabs, and how Jews and Arabs can live peacefully side by side together as brothers and sisters. As an Arab Muslim, it's very important for me to speak out about these topics, to support Israel. You have to speak the truth. You have to stand with justice. I know the truth. People who didn't live in Israel don't know the truth, and we need to fix it.
Let me start by saying I do not hate or even dislike any group of people of any kind. What I dislike is prejudice, racism, and bigotry, or unkind characterizations of any religious, ethnic, or national group. That being said, I'm going to tell you about the Middle East through my experience. I'm going to tell you my life story. You heard an introduction about my professional life, but I'm going to tell you tonight about my experience, my opinion based on my life of the Middle East and what I went through and what the Muslims and the Palestinians did to my country. And I'm going to let you make your own conclusion of what I have to say. A lot of people, when they hear about the Middle East, they think the Middle East is made only of Muslims. When they hear the word Arab, they think all Arabs are Muslims. This is not necessarily true. I am a Christian Arab. In the Middle East, there are two countries that are non-Muslim. One, the Jewish state, which is fighting for its survival and existence at this time. And the other one is named Lebanon. And it was the only Christian country in the Middle East before the Muslims of Iran, the Christians, took over the country. And they are controlling it right now under Syrian occupation. When Lebanon got its independence from France in the early 40s, we prospered. We built the country. The majority of the country, the majority of the Lebanese were Christians. The Muslims were the minority. We are the descendants of the Phoenicians, so we were good in commerce. In a very short period of time, we made Lebanon, Beirut, the Paris of the Middle East, the banking capital of the Middle East. That's where all the Muslims and all the sheikhs, all the royals from the Arabic countries came to party and have a good time because my country offered them the westernization that their countries forbid. Even though I was raised in a Christian country, my country was very much under the influence of its neighbors, the Arabs. The Lebanese were trying to please their neighbors, the big Arab countries. And even though we did not have any enemy and we did not concentrate on building our military, we just concentrated on the commerce, we kind of more or less followed the Arabic propaganda that the rest of the Arabs were saying. And even though I was a Christian, I was born into a Christian family. My mother and my father were married for 22 years. They were unable to have any children. And my mother was 55 years old, and my father was 60 when I was born. Thank you. As an only child, I had the ideal childhood, being worshipped by two mature adults who looked at me as a miracle from God, who were so thankful for being blessed with a child. And even though I was raised in a Christian country, to Christian parents, I went to Christian private schools. And even in my Christian private school, in our Bible class, we did not study the Old Testament. I knew nothing about the Old Testament. We were told that that's the enemy's book, it's the Torah, it's for the Jews. It wasn't even called the Bible. We only studied the new book of the Testament. On television, all we watched was propaganda against Israel. I was taught that the Jews were evil, they were barbaric, they were demon-possessed, they were the source of the problem in the Middle East, and the only time we will have peace in the Middle East is when we kill all the Jews and drive them into the sea. That's what I watched on television. That's what I heard on the radio. That's what the society taught. We Christians, as we concentrated on building our country, we concentrated on education. Education is very important to us. So, because education is very important, we didn't have a lot of children. We get married to one spouse until death do us part. And from the time we get married, we have 2, 3, maybe 4 children. And from the time they're born, we concentrate on giving them a good education. We think about what college we're going to send them to, what type of lifestyle we're going to give them, how are we going to be able to feed them. The Muslims, on the other hand, are allowed to marry up to 4 wives at a time, not in a lifetime. So they have a lot of children out of every wife. And that shifted the population in Lebanon because we became the minority and they became the majority in a very short period of time. The most famous Muslim in the world today is Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden is 1 out of 53 children. He himself has 27 children. Between father, son, they have produced 80 children. How many of you, my friends sitting in this room tonight, have produced 53 or 27 children each? I doubt any of you, unless you're Muslims. At that time, we didn't even know what the word jihad meant, because we Christians minded our own business. We didn't care about anybody else. We didn't want to offend anyone. We didn't want to hurt anyone. We helped the Muslims. We looked at them as colleagues. We looked at them as friends. We looked at them as business associates. They did not. They looked at us as the enemies, as the infidels. We stopped traveling. After 1970, we used to go, I lived in the South, and my parents, the whole family lived in Beirut. And we stopped traveling. We used to go spend Christmas and Easter at my uncle's house in Beirut. And I would ask my parents, how come we're not going to Beirut for the holidays? And my father would give me some line, oh, well, we decided to stay home this holiday. And you have to understand, home meant me with my mom and my dad, two mature adults. It wasn't fun. Well, the rest of the family was down in Beirut. But the reason we stopped traveling was because Muslims started checking up checkpoints on the side of the roads. And they would stop cars. And they would get people out of their cars. And they would look at their IDs. And in the Middle East, you are classified on your national ID if you are a Muslim, a Christian, or a Jew. So when the Muslims would get the Christians out of the car and realize that they are Christians, they would shoot them in cold blood, the whole family. The word spread very fast, and we became prisoners to our homes and cities and towns. The Muslims strengthened, and in 1975, they declared jihad on the Christians. And they started massacring city after city, town after town. The Moor, one of the biggest cities in Lebanon, had the biggest massacre. They killed thousands at a time. The atrocities that they were able to do was unheard of. We were stunned. They would walk into a bomb shelter and see a Christian mother and a father and a little baby hiding in the bomb shelter in a corner. They would take the baby, tie one leg of the baby to the mother and another leg to the father, and pull the parents apart, splitting the child in half. I had a very dear friend who was completely mentally disturbed. And the reason why she was mentally disturbed is because they made her slaughter her own son on her lap. They tied her to a chair, tied her son to her lap, put a knife to her hand, and made her slaughter her own son. They used to walk into the churches, urinate and defecate on the altars, and use the Bible as toilet paper. All this was going on as the world watched, and no one cared, and no one understood. No one understood. And they continued doing this. They started taking over the military bases in Lebanon. Well, I lived in South Lebanon. And as the Muslims took over all the military bases, there was one military base left in South Lebanon in the hands of the Christians. It was 50 yards above my house. and they started shelling it. They missed the military base, but the multiple rockets landed at my home, bringing it down, just like the World Trade Center, on a much smaller scale. And I was buried under the rubble. And I was wounded. And I still have shrapnels in my body and the scars to prove it. People walk around with numbers on their arms. I don't know if there are any of you here who are Holocaust survivors. But I have my number that I look at every morning and every night and every day I take a shower as a reminder of the hatred that can exist in the world today. I was wounded and buried under the rubble because the shrapnel cut my major artery in my arm. And they couldn't get me to a hospital. I was wounded at 9 o'clock at night. They couldn't get me to the hospital till 8 o'clock the next day. I was on my last breath. And I ended up in the hospital for 2.5 months. And I would ask my parents, laying in a hospital bed, 10 years old, why did they do this to us? And my parents would tell me, because we are Christians. We are the infidels. The Muslims want to kill us. So I knew ever since I was 10 years old that I wanted dead by the Muslims simply because I was born a Christian. After 3 surgeries, I was released and I went home. And home was no longer the home that I left, the home that I knew. Home became a bomb shelter, 6 feet underground, with no electricity, no water, and very little food. When we went into the bomb shelter, we thought the fighting is going to stop, and it's just a 2-3 week thing. We slept in cardboard boxes because my father was a businessman and he used the bomb shelter as a storage room. Well, after 2-3 weeks of sleeping in cardboard boxes, we realized we are in for a long haul. So we brought 2 mattresses from our garage and we put it in the bomb shelter. Meanwhile, the Palestinians and the Muslims surrounded us to slaughter us. And we knew how we were going to be slaughtered. We knew what to expect from the Muslims if they got their hands on us and the Palestinians. But to our back was Israel. The border was behind our town. So we were either going to be slaughtered by the Palestinians and the Muslims, or we go to the Jews and beg for help. The Jews, the enemy, the barbaric, the demon-possessed. But we knew of the 2 evils. We knew the Jews are not going to kill us because, after all, we had more shared values with them than we had with the Muslims. So a few people from my town crawled in the middle of the night and waved down an Israeli jeep, an Israeli patrol, and begged for help. Israel said, I'll help you out. I'll keep you alive. And Israel started coming in the middle of the night and bringing ammunition to the Christian men fighting, and bringing food to the militia to help them stay alive, and bringing milk to the children, because the Muslims and the Palestinians cut off everything. We couldn't get any food supplies or anything. Our only lifeline became Israel. Israel would take the Christian men to teach them how to fight, because the Christian men in Lebanon were only trained to get a good education. They were not street gangs. They didn't know how to fight. And you can have all the degrees, all the doctorates, and all the masters, and all the education on the wall. It doesn't do you squat when a fanatic is pointing a gun at you, wanting to kill you because he believed it's an order from God. And Israel would take the Christian men and train them in groups. We'll bring a group and take another group. And this became my life. For 7 years, from age 10 to age 17, I lived underground in that bomb shelter. No electricity, no heat. We froze in the wintertime. We would light like a campfire. My father would sneak out and get branches from trees and would light it in this small room, 8 by 10. Dark room. And a lot of mornings we used to wake up poisoned with carbon monoxide. And whoever woke up first had to drag the other 2 out and hit them on their faces to wake up so we can survive. To get some food, we would crawl out of the bomb shelter, my mother and I, and fetch some grass to eat. I learned how to eat every type of dandelion, every type of plant, every type of anything that can heal me, even thorn. I know exactly which thorn I can eat and which thorn is poisonous, and how to peel the thorns out of the plant so I can eat the leaf. And that's what we ate. And my mother would soak chickpeas overnight, and rice and lentils, so we can eat the next day. And to get some water, we would crawl to a nearby spring where my mother would put her stocking on top of the bottle to catch all the worms and all the maggots and all the rocks so we can drink the water. And we would crawl back 200 yards. It will take us sometimes hours, 6-7 hours to get back to the bomb shelter. as the bullets were flying passing our heads. It's a very amazing thing to live under a sniper watch. You've seen how the snipers terrorized the Washington, D.C. area. The sniper was after me personally. He knew my every move. He knew how much the water is going to last me. He knew when I go out to get food. And that's how we lived. And our lifeline was Israel. And this went on for 3 years. I was 13 and a half years old one night when we got word from the military. A friend of ours stopped by and he said, tonight we're going to be slaughtered because we cannot last any longer. We had lost so many men. We could not fight anymore. The fighting has been going on 24 hours a day, 2 weeks straight. And he said, tonight we're going to die, and if anything happens, I wish you a merciful death. And we had a half-hour ceasefire. And I put on my Easter dress that my mother had sewn for me because I wanted to look pretty when I'm dead, because I knew no one would bury me. And I was crying as my mother combed my hair because she didn't know what to tell me. I was telling her, I don't want to die. I'm only 13 years old. I don't want to die. She couldn't say anything. We sat in the corner of our bomb shelters and held each other's hands, my mother, my father, and myself. And my parents said, we lived a long life. Whatever happens to us is okay. If they come to kill us, we'll create a distraction, and you run towards Israel and you never look back. Thank God I didn't have to do that. The only reason we survived is because that night Israel came physically into Lebanon to protect the Christians. And that's how I'm alive today. And Israel set up checkpoints around our towns and kicked away the Muslims, so at least we didn't have the snipers to worry about anymore. And set up a few checkpoints around us. And this is how we lived for another 4 years, until 1982, when Israel entered Lebanon. And recognize how I say Israel entered Lebanon. Israel did not occupy Lebanon. And the only reason Israel entered Lebanon is because Syria had gotten involved in the war under the auspices of a peacekeeping force. And Syria used Lebanon to shell Israel. And Iran sent Hezbollah and set them out and trained them under the cover of Syria also to shell Israel. It wasn't only the war, the civil war between the Christians and the Muslim Lebanese. It was the Muslims from Libya, the Muslims from Jordan, the Muslims from Syria, the Muslims from Egypt. Exactly what's going on in Iraq today. All these people came to Lebanon to fight Israel. And they were shelling Israel to the point where all the northern borders of Israel, the people lived in bomb shelters just like us. Their lives ceased to exist. And Israel entered Lebanon just far enough to push the Syrian artillery far enough that the Syrian bombs would not reach Israel. And they went all the way to Beirut. You know, Lebanon is a very, very small country. It doesn't take much for artillery range to reach Israel. During that, my mother became wounded by a Muslim shell as the Muslims were shelling us frantically. The Muslim shell fell in front of my bomb shelter and my mother became wounded. And we had no place to treat her but Israel, because Israel is our only lifeline. And before we left the bomb shelter, my father gave me $60. And he said, here is $60 in case you need any money. And I remember touching money for the first time in my life. Because when you live in the bomb shelter, you don't go shopping. I took the money, and we went up to the Lebanese hospital, which was a shell. It was completely bombed out. And Israel had set up 1 Israeli doctor and 2 Israeli nurses on duty for first aid purposes. So they gave my mother first aid, and they put her in an Israeli-donated ambulance. And the chauffeur, the driver, was a Lebanese driver who drove us to the border. It was a 10-minute drive. We got to the border, and the Lebanese driver walks around the ambulance to me, and he asks me if I had any money for the ambulance ride. And I said, sure. And I pull, like an innocent teenager, I pull all the money that my daddy had given me. And I show it to him, and I said, how much do I owe you? And he looked at my money, and he says, give me 30. And I gave him $30, which was half the money I had, with tears in my eyes. And I thanked him so much for driving us to the border. They put my mother into another Israeli ambulance and drove us into Israel, an hour away to the nearest hospital that can take care of my mother's injury. The Israeli driver was a middle-aged man. He treated me like his own daughter. He treated me with such love, such respect, such compassion. I was stunned. For the first time in my life, I was alone in Israel by myself, even though my mother was unconscious in the back of the ambulance. I was by myself in Israel with this man, and I was completely helpless, and I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. And this man showed me such love and respect, such compassion. He talked to me all the way to the ambulance, all the way to the hospital, and told me that he was a doctor and he was just called 12 hours ago because he was in the reserve to serve for the war. We got to the hospital, and I took the money out of my pocket to pay him the fee for the ambulance, thinking to myself, God, if the 10-minute ride cost me $30, I am sure this money is not going to be enough. And I walked around, and I asked him, how much do I owe you? And he looked at me, and he says, what is this for? And I said, you know, the fee for the ambulance. And he said, you don't owe me anything. This is a free service from us to you. Keep your money. You might need it. And I wish your mother a speedy recovery. And I hope all goes well for you. And I looked at that man, and I felt so thankful. I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. I was crying. I thought to myself, what an ethical man. What an honest man. This man could have taken my money and partied all night, and I would not have known the difference. He was a stranger to me. I was a stranger to him. Yet he didn't. And I became so angry because I realized the Lebanese driver, who's a friend of the family, stole my money. He robbed me. That was the first lesson I learned about the difference between the Israelis and the Arabs. We got into the hospital. There were hundreds of people wounded on the floor. There were Palestinians brought in from Lebanon. There were Israeli soldiers brought in from Lebanon. There were Christian Lebanese brought in. There were Muslim Lebanese brought in. And I could not believe my eyes. I was stunned. I thought to myself, I can understand why they're helping me. I'm a Christian. I am their friend. But why the heck are they helping the Palestinians and the Muslims? Little did I know about the values and the character of the Israeli people. The doctors treated everyone, every person, according to his or her injury. The doctor who treated my mother treated her before he treated the Israeli soldier laying next to her because her injury was more severe. He even insisted on bringing an Arabic-speaking nurse so I can understand everything he was saying about my mother's condition. I could not believe my eyes. They didn't see religion. They didn't see nationality. They didn't see background. They didn't see political affiliation. They saw people suffering, people who needed help. They took my mother to the 4th floor of the hospital, and we were not in the room but maybe 5 minutes. And I heard all this commotion outside our balcony, outside our window, and people were running from the nurse's station through our room out to the balcony to see what was happening. And I went out to see what was happening. And 2 Israeli helicopters had just landed bringing wounded soldiers from Lebanon, and they were taking them out on stretchers into the emergency room. And I stood at that balcony, felt sick to my stomach. I felt brokenhearted. I felt ashamed. I felt humiliated. I felt out of place. After all, these people are wounded because of the war with my country. I didn't even make eye contact with anyone because I didn't know how they will feel about me. And I felt the tapping on my shoulder. And I looked to my side. And there was this Israeli nurse standing next to me, and she says, "You are new here, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, they just brought in my mother. She's in this room." And this lady puts her arm around me, and she says, "Don't worry, we'll take good care of her. Everything will be just fine." And I broke out crying. I broke out sobbing. Because for the first time in my life, I experienced compassion that I knew for a fact my country, my culture would not be able to show their enemy. I saw the true colors of the Israelis in their most trying moments and the way they were able to love their enemy. I could not believe my eyes. I spent 22 days at that hospital. 22 days changed my life. 22 days changed the way I listened to the radio. I watched television. I believe information because I realized I was fed nothing but a fabricated lie by my government against the Jews and the Israelis that was so far from reality. I spent 22 days and I swore that one day I will be back to Israel. Because I had to leave to Lebanon to take care of my parents. I was an only child. But I swore that one day I will be back to Israel. Because these are the type of people I want to be with. These are the type of values I want to adopt. Because I knew they had something I did not even have. They were able to love and forgive the Palestinians and their enemy much more than I was able to. And I was the Christian who's supposed to love like Jesus taught. Those 22 days in the hospital changed my life. We had a Muslim woman with us in the room. And even after 10 days, the doctors would come and change her bandage and take care of her. And when they would leave, she would say, I hate you all, I wish you were all dead. And if you could see evil, I saw evil. Because when you are unable to be grateful for the people that saved your life, there is no hope for you. When the Israeli people heard that there were Lebanese wounded in the hospital, they came bringing presents. They brought chocolates. They would come and ask people, what can we do for you? How can we help you? Our homes are open to you. If you want to come take a shower, what can we bring you? Can we bring you clothing? Do you have everything you need? They came extending a peaceful hand. They didn't even ask anyone what your religion was. Are you a Christian or a Palestinian? Nobody in my 22 days at the hospital, no one even knew if I was a Christian or a Palestinian. They never even cared. It didn't matter. I got to know the parents, the mothers of Israeli soldiers who were wounded in the hospital. One in particular, Rina Potashnik from Pardes Khana, her only child, Amir, her son, 19 years old, was wounded in his eyes. And she was there in the hospital with him. And I would go visit with her. She became like my mother, my friend. And I would go visit with her. And one day the Israeli band, the Israeli national band, came to play Israeli songs, Israeli musics, to lift the soldiers' spirits. And they came into Amir's room, where Rina and I were standing, crying. And I was so moved by the music, I felt so out of place. And I started walking out of the room. And Rina pulls me by my arm, and she brings me back in, and she says, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And she hugs me, and we both stand there crying together. What a difference between her, a mother, who's standing in front of her son, her only child, 19-year-old deformed child, and still able to love me, the Arab. And what a difference between her and a Muslim mother who sends her child, her son, with a suicide belt to blow himself up to smithereens just to kill a few Jews and Christians. I had to go back to Lebanon. I had to leave the hospital. But I swore I will be back to Israel one day. And 3 years later, I was able to go back to Jerusalem and live in Jerusalem and work as news anchor for World News, for Middle East television, broadcast seen throughout the Middle East. I was able to cover world events. And I was able to be involved with world media and be open to world media and be able to read information that I can evaluate for myself without the filters of the Arabic propaganda, the Arabic filters, the religious and cultural propaganda that Arabs are oblivious to. And I started seeing the Arabic culture for what it really was, a culture based on hate, on lies. And I realized that Islam and the Islamic culture and religion is such a basic threat to civilized people in the world, particularly to Western civilization. If you look at the Arabic countries, all the nations of all the societies in the last 100 years, all the societies in the world were able to advance, with the exception of the Arabic countries. They're not only not moving forward, but they're sliding backward. The UN published a report about the human development in Arabic countries. And that report was written by, quote, distinguished Arab intellectuals. This is not Israeli propaganda, and this is not American propaganda. And the report states that the GDP, the gross domestic product, of 22 Arabic countries put together is smaller than the GDP of Spain. 22 Arabic countries put together with all their oil, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Arab Emirates, Sudan, Djibouti, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, 22 of them. Their GDP is smaller than the GDP of Spain. Does that give you an idea about the lack of education, the lack of human resources in these countries? In the last 20 years, The combined patents by the Arabic world totaled around 350. South Korea alone created 16,000 patents. Does that give you an idea about the lack of education in the Arabic cultures? But if you look at the Arabic cultures, the other problem with the Arabic societies is their form of government. The leaders get richer and the people get poorer. And the leaders don't mind their people getting poorer. And if you look at the Middle East, it's a one-man regime. All the countries surrounding Israel, all the Arabic countries, Saudi Arabia, the royal family, you can identify every country by one man or one family. Syria, Assad. Jordan, Hussein. Saddam Hussein used to be in Iraq. Libya, Gaddafi. Iran, the Khomeinis. You can identify every country by a royal family or a man, and it's a dictatorship. And they become richer, and their people are becoming poorer and poorer and poorer. But they don't mind it. And they create a sideshow called the Palestinian problem. That's how you distract your people from pointing the finger at you. That's how you make them look somewhere else. And you finance that advertising plan, and you call it the Palestinian problem. And that's why Saudi Arabia sends $25,000 for every suicide bomber's family, to encourage more crazies to go blow themselves up. Do you think if the average man in Saudi Arabia who lives in a tent without electricity knew that the royal family went on vacation in November to London and spent $81 million in 7 days, do you think they will be happy? Of all the countries in the Middle East, Israel is the only democratic country in the middle of them. They created the Palestinian problems. The Arabs created the Palestinian problems, and they finance it. So their peoples won't point the finger at them. So they can stay in power. So they can stay corrupt. Look at the Palestinian territories since 1995. With all the millions and millions that have poured into the Palestinian territories since 1995 to Yasser Arafat, nothing happened but the leaders got richer. Look at Yasser Arafat, a multimillionaire. Former Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas has a $1.5 million villa in Gaza. How many people in Gaza do you know live in a $1.5 million villa? Of all the people in the world, the Palestinian people are the only people who live under their own leadership in refugee camps like rats. If the Palestinian leadership cared about its people, they would have taken those millions and built townhomes for them, at least let them live in dignity instead of refugee camps. But it's corruption that's eating the Arabic world. And they try to blame the Palestinian problem on Israel. Here's what the Arabic newspapers were saying about the Israeli occupation. Back then, when the Palestinians had no problem with it, the Arabic countries fueled the problem. Here's excerpts from newspapers between 1948 and 1963 that were published in the Arabic world stating how they created the Palestinian problem. Emil Khouri, secretary of the Palestinian Arab Higher Committee, in an interview with the Beirut Telegraph, September 6, 1948, quote, "The fact that there are these refugees is the direct consequence of the act of the Arab states in opposing partition and the Jewish state. The Arab states agree upon this policy unanimously, and they must share in the solution of the problem." End quote. The Jordanian daily newspaper Palestine, February 19, 1949. The Arab states, which had encouraged the Palestinian Arabs to leave their homes temporarily in order to be out of the way of the Arab invasion armies, have failed to keep their promise to help these refugees. The Beirut Muslim Weekly, Kul Shay, August 19, 1951. Who brought the Palestinians to Lebanon as refugees, suffering now from the malign attitude of newspapers and community leaders who have either honor or conscience? Who brought them over in dire straits and penniless after they lost their honor? The Arab states, and Lebanon amongst them, did it. The Cairo Daily Akhbar al-Yawm, October 12, 1963. The 15th of May, 1948 arrived. On that day, the Mufti of Jerusalem appealed to the Arabs of Palestine to leave the country because the Arab armies were about to enter and fight in their stead. End quote. The Jordanian daily newspaper Al-Urdun, April 9, 1953. For the flight and fall of the other villages, it is our leaders who are responsible because of their dissemination of rumors, exaggerating Jewish crimes and describing them as atrocities in order to inflame the Arabs. By spreading rumors of Jewish atrocities, killings of women and children, etc., they instilled fear and terror in the hearts of the Arabs in Palestine until they fled their homes and properties to the enemy. That's what the Arabs were saying. That's what the Arabs were saying. And let me tell you why, as an educated, civilized, intellectual Arab, I stand here proud to defend the state of Israel. Not because Israel helped my mother, not only because Israel saved my life. It is my duty as a civilized person to acknowledge civilization, to acknowledge advancement, to acknowledge democracy, to acknowledge the human beings and what they have contributed to the world. And let me just state to you, and for every Jew sitting here, I want you to stand up and be proud in your heart of what I have to say, of what your little country has accomplished in the last 50 years. Israel has the highest ratio of university degrees to the population in the world. Israel is ranked number 2 in the world for venture capital funds, right behind the United States. Outside of Canada, outside of the United States and Canada, Israel has the largest number of NASDAQ-listed companies. Israel has the highest average living standards in the Middle East. The per capita income in 2000 was over $17,500, exceeding that of the UK. Israel's $100 billion economy is larger than all its immediate neighbors combined. This is a condensed 1 page out of 4.5 pages that I have, and the list goes on and on. What has the Arab world exported to the world in the last 50 or 100 years, other than suicide bombers and terrorists? Nothing. I thank you for coming and listening to me tonight. Thank you.